Illinois Board of Elections asks the Attorney General for help after one media group publishes the names, birth dates, and voting records of people who live in the state.
23 News reporter Sydney Stoffregan talks to some of the people whose information was published and who say they're concerned with what others could do with that private data.
In late March, the Illinois Board of Elections says it learned one media company, Local Government Information Services, shared voter data on its website. And after repeated requests to remove it were denied, the board decided to go through legal channels.
I think it's kind of concerning the amount of information that they broadcast publicly.
Thousands of Illinois residents face what some say is a violation of privacy after one media group, Local Government Information Services, took private voter information and published it. All over the state, the names, date of birth, address, and voting status of community members is now public. Matt Dietrich with Illinois State Board of Elections says this could keep some people from the polls.
If my information is not safe, I'm not going to register to vote. I'm not going to participate in elections. That is something that we are very, very concerned about.
Genoa residents Charlie and Katie Lang worry about the easy access to their private information. They want the media group to take down the data.
You're going to wind up losing some that don't want to register and vote because they don't want this information out there, even though it doesn't say who they voted for. And when that happens, I think the numbers are going to wind up being skewed.
Dietrich says the media group likely got the data from a political committee that had access to sensitive information.
Always very protective of the voter data that we keep in our statewide voter registration database. We've never had a problem with abuse of any of the personal information that's contained in that voter file until this year.
We tried contacting Local Government Information Services but received no comment. Dietrich says the Illinois State Board of Elections is working with the Attorney General to take necessary actions.
Thank you, Sydney. And in January of 2018, the State Board of Elections stopped providing voters date of birth. Dietrich says local government services likely obtained records from the 2016 presidential election.